It is I, Andreen, the Jewish American Priestess, and I'm here for a Hebrune reading today, commemorating Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av. 9th of Av is the remembrance of the destruction of both temples in Jerusalem, and it is the day of mourning for the Jewish people. And I'm going to do 3 Hebrune readings today to talk about grief and what we're trying to release now and rebuild. So I have 3 objects for us today, if you'd like to choose one, and then I'll do a reading based on which object you choose. The first one is a poppy seed pod that came out of my garden last year. Similarly, I have the exoskeleton of a tomatillo shell. From the garden. And thirdly, lastly, I have the desiccated rose. All symbols of life that has come and passed, and that we could take the time to mourn now. So take the moment to choose which of these 3 objects, the poppy pod, the Tomatillo skeleton, or the dried rose, speaks to you today. And we'll get into the readings in one moment. So we're going to start with the poppy seed pod, and I'll set it here in this set of hands that are holding some of the ashes of my herb bundle, my sage herb bundle above here. Ashes are one of the symbols that we use for, again, remembering and being in mourning. So I'm going to take out 3 Hebrunes today for each of these piles. And maybe more. We'll see what comes up. And then we'll do a reading about these. The first one is the letter Yud. Secondly, I have the letter Gimel. Next is the letter Resh. On the lower line, I have the letter Lamed. The letter Bet. Let's start with that. And again, this is for the folks who chose this poppy pod. I'm going to turn this down just a smidge so we can see better the letters we're talking about. All right, starting in the center, we have the letter Yud. And the letter Yud is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, but it is the first letter of the name of the divine. It's reminiscent of the single point out of which the entire universe was created. And that is our central issue here, this one point. It is the first letter of the name of the divine, the unpronounceable name, the Yod He Vav He. And it is this representation of the manifestation of the number 1. Because 1 times 10 is the ultimate manifestation of that number 1. So it is the one divine that manifests. All letters have some sort of yud in them, or are comprised of a variety of yuds, not unlike atoms make up all of the universe. It represents the number 10 in the Hebrew alphabet, and there are a lot of variations on the number 10. We have the 10 Sephirot, which are the emanations of the divine. We have the 10 plagues in Egypt. We have the 10 commandments. Yod means hand, and so it has to do with action in the world, how one uses one's hands to make or do or help. It also can have to do with power and authority. There are 10 inscriptions in the void, says the Sefer Yetzirah. So those are the inscriptions through which the divine created the entire universe. And the Yud has to do with both the month of Elul, which comes up next month, and the foundation of sexuality. So whatever this speaks to you about, that oneness, that single point out of which all things come, that the use of one's hand, the 10 plagues, the 10 commandments, the 10 Sephirot, the 10 inscriptions of the void, perhaps one's own sexuality or sexuality in the world. That's the central issue here. What came just before that is the letter Gimel. And the letter Gimel is meant to represent a walking foot. It is the word camel. It talks about forward movement and traveling. And it is the number 3. So what does movement have to do with this? We have this in the position of the past. Something has brought us here. Something has brought us to this place of oneness. Is one of the double letters, and it corresponds to the foundations of peace and evil, or wholeness and brokenness. It rules over the planet Jupiter, which in Hebrew is translated tzedek, and it says, which means justice. So perhaps we have something to do with traveling, coming beforehand, or that dichotomy of peace and evil and justice that's coming right before this time. Perhaps it has to do with the destruction of whatever temple in your life is falling apart. And it's brought us to this time of oneness and wholeness. What's going to help us in this situation is the letter Resh. And Resh is a letter that means head or beginning, like Breshit, which is the first word of the Torah, means in the beginning. And Rosh is the beginning of the new month. For instance, we just came into Rosh Chodesh Av, the month of Av, and we've got Rosh Hashanah coming up very shortly, beginning of the new year. it has, again, one of those binary double foundations of both seed and barrenness. It is the number 200. So what will help us in this situation is the seed of a new beginning, something that's coming to start. Just start something. Begin the thing that you know that you should begin. Plant that seed, metaphorically or literally. Maybe this seed, maybe this small yud seed needs to be planted. And what will not assist right now in the situation is the letter Lamed. And Lamed is the only letter in the Hebrew alphabet that goes above the line. It reaches up high, as if it were reaching for the divine. Lamed is the first letter of the word Lev, which means heart. So it's like this elevated heart, this longing that the heart has toward the divine. It's on the lower line, so perhaps it speaks to the fear of loss of heart, the loss of love, or the loss of heart in oneself. In the foundations of the Sefer Yetzirah, it speaks about action. So maybe now isn't the time to take rapid action, but to reconnect with one's heart, not be afraid of losing heart, and begin again. If you find yourself losing heart, or if you find yourself not being sure what to do in the world of action, move straight on up to the Rosh. One beginning, one small seed. Start small. Start with the smallest letter. And that will bring us through to Beit. See if I can get that. There you go, Beit. Beit is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it means house. It means house or home. It can mean any kind of building, but it is about staying in a place. It's about feeling at home. Maybe your body is your home. Maybe that's the home that we're talking about building toward. In the Zohar, the mystical division of Judaism, the first word in the Torah is Breshit, but it permutes to Rosh Bait, head of the house. So you have Breshit in terms of beginning, and you also have the Beit here, and it can be, Breshit can also be Rosh Bait, so head of the house. It is one of the double letters, and it corresponds in time to Shabbat. And the word Shabbat is made up of the words shev, meaning to sit, and bait, house. So sit in the house, rest, be where you are. And the foundation binary, Beit, corresponds to life and death. And as we say in our tradition from the Torah, choose life. And for those of you who chose this poppy pod today, this is your reading. I wish you an easy fast for Tisha B'Av, And we'll see you again next time. For those of you who chose the Tomatillo pod, looks like a skeleton of a leaf, but it's a globe. It's broken from the wind and the earth. This will be your reading. I'm going to put this up here in the palm of these hands covered in ashes from my herb bundle. And we're going to do a short Hebrune reading for you today. I'll pull out some letters and we'll see what they have to say for you. First off, I have the letter Zayin. In the past position, I'm pulling out the letter Tet. Oops. Above, I have the letter Kuf. On the lower line, I've got the letter Hey. And in the future position, the letter Mem. Okay. So Zayin is, let me pull this up so you can see it. Zayin is the letter Z, basically, and it is a letter that represents a sword or a scepter. It has to do with power. And so something that's coming up for you right now may have to do with power in your life, whether you have power and authority. It can be seen as also the provider of all things is represented by Zayin. And Zayin is the number 7, which is the number of days in the act of creation, including Shabbat. And so it represents Shabbat and the power of Shabbat and the resting of Shabbat. It has to do with survival and rule. And 7 is a very magical number. In time, Zayin corresponds to the month of Sivan, which is the month in which we receive Torah. And so it also has to do with the lightning bolts that came down on Mount Zion. And it corresponds to the body foundation of smell. It can also respond to business, because the tribe of Zebulun is associated with Zayin. And so it may have something to do with business or power or being in charge, maybe being a supervisor in your work, or being a soldier for that matter, being one who protects. But whatever it is, it has to do with power right now. And that's coming up for whoever has chosen this reading. If it doesn't resonate with you, maybe this isn't your reading. And what came right before this is the letter Tet. And the letter Tet is a container, a vessel of some sort. It also is representative of a womb. It is the number 9, as in 9 months of gestation. And the word Tov, which means good, something good within. So coming just prior to this, we've had some kind of gestation or something good that has arrived. And perhaps we're coming into our power now out of that recent past. And Tet also has to do with renewal and rebirth, because the number 9 can be representative of the way that we sound the shofar. 9 shofar blasts, 9 staccato blasts, 9 beats the shofar blast is held, and 9 sets of blasts at Rosh Hashanah, which each person is born again with good potential. It does correspond to the month of Av. We just turned over the month of Av, and now we're heading into Tisha B'Av. So what's come right before this is this gestation period and this concept of renewal. And now we're moving into power, or we're in power now. What's going to help us through this time? We've got the letter Kuf at the top here, and in the upper line, it is the one letter that goes below the line in Hebrew, as if it were coming down from divinity, like a righteous person reaching down into the world. Kuf begins the word kadosh, so it's about holiness. But it is also about the broken shards of the vessels that held divine light, the klipa, the shells or vessels of the vessels. So it's about reaching down into the world to find holiness amongst those things that are broken. So it will help us in this time to reach toward holiness, to find the holiness within ourselves and within all things in this time frame, in order to maybe temper the power that we've been given, or to utilize it for good, for tov. And on the lower line, we have the letter Hey. And the letter Hey is the 5th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is made up of, they say, it's made up of a dalet and part of the gimel, a foot of the gimel here. So it's as if gimel gave part of its foot to dalet. So it represents unification and giving and receiving, unity and completeness. It is the first letter of the word hineni, which means here I am, for service, available for service. It is the first letter of the name Havaya, which is one of the names of God, meaning being, and also the words past, present, and future, Haya, Hoveh, and Hiye, which are past, present, and future, being all those things that make up the name of the divine. In the numerology, or the gematria of 5, it speaks to the 5 fingers, and again, action in the world, what we might be able to do to elicit change in the world. It corresponds to the liver in the body, and the liver, which is keved, has the same root as the word kavod, which means gravitas, or glory, or honor. And it corresponds also to the physical sense of sight. And when that's on the lower line, how that is showing up in this reading, when we are talking about the goodness and the power and the holiness, perhaps we have some concerns about being able to be present, being able to be active in the world. And if that is of concern, if there's a fear around that for you in this time, just bring yourself back up to holiness and owning your inner holiness, and that will bring us back into the power that is there for you at this time. And that brings us to the future and the letter Mem. And the letter Mem is one of the mother letters. It is the letter that corresponds to water, the element of water. Mayim, Haim. And also the prophetess Miriam, who had a well that followed her miraculously throughout the wilderness. The letter Mem is this life force, this life-giving force. It is the 13th letter of the alphabet, and so it speaks about the 13 attributes of the divine. But it is in Gematria the number 40, so it is another womb. You've started with a womb, and you're moving back into a womb. One that is filled with water and life, not just goodness, but like fullness of the mother element of water. The number 40 corresponds to the 40 weeks of gestation in the human, and the 40 days on Sinai, the 40 years in the desert, and the 40 days of rain with Noah. This is the belly and the body, and the waters of life. So as you have moved from this gestation time of goodness into your power, hold fast to holiness. Release your fears about action in the world. Release your fears about being able to be present. Cling to your holiness and move forward into a new time of gestation, into the healing waters of Mayim Haim. I hope those of you who chose the Tomatillo Skeleton have an easy fast this Tisha B'Av, and we will see you here next time. For those of you who chose the dried rose, I'll set this up here in the hands and the ashes of the herb bundle. I'm going to pull out some Hebrunes for you all today about the upcoming observation of the 9th of Av and our cultural mourning ritual. So the first one coming out of the bag is the letter Tav. The next one, or the previous area, we've got Tet. So that's in the position of the recent past. On the line above, we have the letter Zayin. And on the line below, we have the letter Vav. And then for the position of the near future, we have the letter Mem. Okay. So the central issue in this reading is the letter Tav, and it is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is a seal or a stamp, like a signature on the alphabet after it was used to bring all of the universe into creation. It is represented by the gematria number of 400. 400, which is 10 times 40. 40 being the number of weeks of gestation in a human birth. So it's this idea of a completion of a gestation. So that which has come into being. It is sometimes related to reincarnation, as the past lives are stamped onto us, like a seal, or a chop at the bottom of a piece of art or a document. It is the final letter in the word emet, which is truth. And those letters represent the beginning of the alphabet, the center letter of the alphabet, and the final letter of the alphabet, emet. And some say that it is comprised of the letters dalet and nun, which would spell out the word deen or dan, which would be judgment. So there is this finality to the judgment of Tav, or the completion of all of creation. It's one of our double letters, and so it has this binary foundation of sovereignty and slavery. It governs the heavenly body, the moon. So that's our central issue right now coming up, this finality, this completion letter, this idea of sovereignty in the signature of the divine on all of creation. And what came just prior to that is the letter Tet, the other T in the alphabet. And the letter Tet is a vessel. It's sometimes seen as a cup or a womb. It is represented of the number 9, which is the number of months in gestation of a human person. So it has something to do with a vessel, something holding something else, and often it is related to something good, because Tet is the first letter of the word Tov, which means good. And it also has this reference to renewal, not necessarily reincarnation, but possibly reincarnation, something being born again as we come into Rosh Chodesh. And that's come just before this. It is also, in time, the month of Av, which is now. So the month of Av just turned over, and we have this letter Tav here as the recent past. Now what's going to help us in our situation of this final stamp and completion is the letter Zayin. Zayin is a letter that is seen as a scepter or a sword. It represents power. So coming into the power that's brought to us through focusing on divinity. That power is only given to us by divinity, and it is the number 7. The number 7 being the number of days of completion in the creation. And so we have another completion letter here, the number 7. it's it's all 7 days of creation, and in time it corresponds to the month of Sivan, when we were given Torah, another kind of completion time. And so it also not only represents a sword or a scepter, but also lightning as it comes down on Sinai as the Torah is being given. So that's the thing that's going to help us, remembering our power, remembering to grasp onto the power that's given to us through the divine. And on the bottom line, we have the letter Vav. The letter Vav is a connection letter, so what goes below the line is that which is not going to help us as we move through this period. And this idea of connection, I don't think it's that connection isn't going to help us, although maybe it's time to spend some time in personal contemplation. The letter Vav is literally the word and in Hebrew. And so perhaps being on the lower line, it does mean, don't rely on connection as we go through our grief, but spend some time in solitude and grieving on your own, rather than, again, relying on connection. Vav is the number 6. It comes right before Zayin, and it represents also a completion, because the 6 days were created in, the universe was created in 6 days, and on the 7th day there was the rest, the resting day of Shabbat. So a lot of completion letters going on here. Vav is about connection, bringing things together, and it is like the standing person, and like a taproot, reaching up to the sky and also deep down into the earth, so that there's connection between heaven and earth, between the divine and the earthly beings. So I don't think it's saying don't feel connected to the divine. It's saying if you are concerned about or afraid that that isn't happening, bring yourself back up to this remembrance of power and sovereignty that we have right now in this time of mourning, that the divine sits with us in our mourning. It doesn't necessarily stop bad things from happening, but it does stay with us as we mourn. So if you have this fear of lack of connection, focus back up on the power that there is in connecting with the divine. And that will bring us to our completion letter here, Mem. Mem is it's one of the mother letters, and it is also representative of a womb. It is the number 40 in Gematria, which is the number of weeks of gestation. So we have both the womb of Tet and the womb of Mem. And Mem stands for water, the creation of water, the element of water, and Mayim Hayim, waters of life. It also reminds us of Miriam, who is the prophetess who had a well that would follow her through the desert. So that's what's coming, is that nourishment of water, that understanding of the waters of life that are coming to us as we move through this time of mourning. Maybe it's the tears also that come as we move forward through Av. So we have this completion letter here, and this womb letter here, and again, Tet is the number 9, which represents those 9 months, and also the month of Av. It corresponds to what will help us is holding on to our power. What will not help us is being afraid of loss of connection or relying too much on others to help us through the mourning, that maybe we need some time alone right now to work through our own mourning. And as we get through this period, it will bring us to the waters of life, maybe through the tears, into embracing of life. So for those of you who chose the rose today, this is your reading for the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. I hope that you have an easy fast, and we will see you on the other side.